Chapter 22. Death. The hallways were deserted, with students all having retreated to their common rooms to celebrate the end of tests. As Harry floated through the air behind Quirrell, he realized that the portraits wouldn't even notice anything, because he was covered with the cloak. Most of them seemed to be away from their paintings as well, as though they too were celebrating. Quirrell could make him vanish and he'd never be found. If Quirrell and Voldemort knew about his time reset abilities, they could just turn him to stone or into a bone or something and be rid of him permanently. Harry realized that he heard talking. "We'll use the boy to get the stone," the voice whispered from under Quirrell's turban. "And then we can be rid of him." Quirrell spoke quietly. "And what of the prophecy?" "Your hand is my hand," the voice said, chuckling. "For now?" Harry muttered under his breath, but neither of the other two seemed to notice. "Finite incantatem," Harry muttered. "Finite incantatem, finite incantatem." He regretted not practicing the spell wandlessly more. He'd given it up after a few tries because it seemed that he'd never be able to reverse any serious magic with it wandlessly. Now that he needed it, he tried over and over again, but it didn't seem to have an effect. "The boy is trying wandless magic," the voice underneath the turban said. It chuckled, as if he could do anything even if he got free. "It's best not to underestimate anyone," Quirrell said. "Should I stun him?" They were moving up to the second floor now. Harry floated behind Quirrell as he walked up the moving stairs. "I enjoy watching him squirm," the voice said. It chuckled. "He'll be dead soon enough." "As you wish," Quirrell said. Harry continued muttering. After the horrendous effort it had taken him to learn to axio things wandlessly, all to little effect, it seemed impossible that he was going to be able to have any effect at all on the spell that was binding him. That Quirrell had used a full body bind on Harry was almost insulting. It said that he didn't think that Harry was dangerous enough to be worth any stronger spell. There were spells that stopped the victim from thinking or speaking, and since Harry had never learned to cast spells silently, that would have been it. "Finite incantatem, finite incantatem," Harry kept muttering, a steady stream of words that seemed to have no effect on the spell covering him at all. Perhaps he was making a mistake trying to undo the entire spell. If he could just undo part of the spell, he might be able to grab Quirrell when he turned and tried to do something to him. Harry doubted that Quirrell knew that Harry's touch would burn his flesh. He hadn't touched Harry, even when he covered him with the cloak. If he had, he might have had a nasty surprise. Harry began mentally focusing on his right hand, even as continued to recite the spell. The power of the spell holding him was immense compared to the tiny amount of power he was generating to unravel it. However, Harry felt his index finger begin to loosen. They were moving up the stairs leading to the third floor, and Harry began to wonder with alarm if they were intending to feed him to the giant dog that was reputed to live there. It would be the perfect murder. Not only would it get rid of Harry, but Dumbledore would probably be sacked for having a giant beast in his castle that killed the boy who lived. Voldemort seemed to like plans that served multiple purposes. The bounty on Harry's head not only had the chance that someone else would kill Harry, but it probably diverted aura resources away from his own followers and onto the people who just casually were willing to attack Harry. It meant that there were more eyes looking for Harry, and it meant that his own followers could spend less effort doing that than whatever else they were doing. Harry wondered if whatever this stone Voldemort was looking for had been placed by Dumbledore to distract Voldemort from killing Harry. As long as Voldemort was focused on getting a new body, Harry assumed he didn't want to be a face on the back of someone's head forever. He wouldn't focus on murdering Harry as much. It was likely that both Voldemort and Dumbledore had multiple sets of plans, each of which had multiple purposes. Of course, engaging in that kind of chessmanship meant that more basic things, like hiring practices, had to be sacrificed. No one could focus on everything. Harry's right hand was able to move up to the wrist. They reached a door to the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side. Quirrell pulled his wand and began unlocking the door, which apparently was locked with some sort of locking spell. "Hurry," the voice at the back of Quirrell's skull whispered. "Dumbledore will be returning soon, and we've spent too much time overcoming the obstacles and returning for the boy." While they were distracted, Harry changed his chant, whispering, "Accio, wand." Quirrell was close, but he was speaking to the voice at the back of his head. "It will be done soon. The hound is sleeping, and the other challenges won't take long." He didn't notice as the wand slipped out of his pocket and into Harry's hand, which he had pulled free from the cloak. If any of the portraits noticed the sudden appearance of a child's hand in mid-air, none commented. Harry suspected that portraits weren't nearly as observant as the people they'd been created to resemble. From his position, he couldn't really see many of the portraits anyway. The door opened, and Harry stared inside at the monstrous three-headed dog inside. It was huge. From what he could see, any one of its 3 heads would stand as tall as he did. A harp lay beside it, playing a soothing music. Harry had researched 3-headed dogs, of course, shortly after he'd learned there was one in the castle. He'd also researched ghosts, acromantula, unicorns, hippogriffs and thestrals, werewolves and bugbears. Any creature that was known to live near the castle or the Forbidden Forest, he'd looked up, if only to see whether it was likely to kill him or not. He'd had images of him approaching a unicorn, thinking it was perfectly safe like in Muggle literature, only to be speared through the chest and trampled. Fortunately, they were safe, but until he'd looked them up, he'd had no way of knowing. He'd also looked up Grindylows, Selkies and the giant squid, although he hadn't had any intention of going near the lake if he didn't have to. It would be too easy to drown him and declare it an accident. Among the more interesting things he knew about 3-headed dogs was that music put them to sleep. It seemed like a rather inconvenient problem in a guard animal to Harry. Still, the sheer size and intimidation factor probably made it worth it. Quirrell grumbled. Apparently the dog had shifted in its sleep, covering the trapdoor leading to wherever he was planning to go. He pulled his wand and slowly managed to levitate the dog. Harry was impressed. The dog had to weigh as much as a small bus, and Quirrell was levitating it, even if it was slowly. Harry's limit was somewhere around that of an average-sized man. "Finite incantatem," Harry continued to say, but this time he tried to wave his wand. The angle was poor and the wand motions were difficult. The one thing Harry was afraid of was dropping his wand. If he did, it would all be over. "Finite incantatem, finite incantatem, finite incantatem." Harry put as much force as he could in the last one, and he suddenly felt something click into place as the wand movements fell into place. He found himself falling to the floor. At the sound of the thump, Quirrell whirled, but Harry was already pointing his wand. "Expelliarmus!" he shouted. Quirrell's wand ripped free of his hand and flew toward Harry with all the force of his frustrated fear and anger. Lunging toward him, Quirrell hissed as Harry grabbed his arm. He pulled back instinctively, only to find Harry's wand in his face. "Remember what I did to the troll?" Harry asked quietly. Quirrell paled. He had been one of the professors to stumble across the aftermath of Harry's encounter. Harry hadn't been fully in his right mind, but he vaguely remembered his being there. "Back off," Harry said, "or I'll give you a chance to see what the inside of your own head looks like." Quirrell backed off rather suddenly, and Harry scrambled to his feet. He reached down and put one foot on Quirrell's wand, grabbed one end and pulled it up sharply, snapping it. The wince on Quirrell's face was deeply satisfying. "I suppose you'll be taking me to the headmaster now," Quirrell said quietly. "I wasn't going to hurt you. I just needed your help with a project." Harry stared at the teacher. Did he really think Harry was that naive? Harry was 8 months older than his body seemed, but he doubted that he'd have been taken in even if he really was just 11 years old. "You and Voldemort, you mean?" Harry asked. "How did he talk you into it? Did he just say, 'You aren't using the back of your head, are you?'" "Don't make jokes about the master boy," Quirrell hissed. He looked as though he was ready to spring forward and attack Harry. "Locomotor mortis," Harry said, waving his wand. Quirrell's legs locked together. He'd still be able to hop, but he was suddenly a great deal less dangerous. "Let me talk to the boy," the voice said. Quirrell fell heavily to his side. He reached up and pulled his turban off, revealing the horrible face beneath. "How did you know I was here?" it asked. "I heard you talking on the way up," Harry lied. "And I knew it was you, because who else would it be?" "We can make a deal," the voice said. "One must kill the other, but no one says when." "It could be today," Harry said. The face was just as monstrous as he remembered, and as it stared at him, its features twisted in anger. "I saw what you did to the troll," the voice said. "If you are that bloodthirsty, you would make a fine Death Eater." "Every bad thing in my life is because of you," Harry hissed. "You have caused me pain like you couldn't imagine, and after all that you think I would just serve you?" "Azkaban will never hold me, boy," the voice said. "My people will free me. It would be safer to take my offer and rule by my side." Harry pretended to consider, then shook his head. The face scowled, and then before Harry could do anything, Quirrell's arms snapped back, pulled in the wrong direction, and the face shouted, "Accio Wand!" Apparently Harry wasn't the only one who'd learned wandless casting. The wand flew through the air, landing in Quirrell's hand. Quirrell rolled, but Harry had already leapt forward. Quirrell screamed as Harry's hand burned his flesh. They both scrabbled for the wand, and Quirrell rolled over Harry, trying to pin him under his own body. With his legs locked together, however, he couldn't get good purchase, and Harry squirmed out from under him, wand in hand. He kicked Quirrell in the back of the head, his foot directly in Voldemort's face. Before Voldemort could recover, Harry was already diving out of the room. He turned and yelled, "Diffindo!" Quirrell tried to roll to avoid the attack, only to realize that Harry wasn't aiming for him at all. His eyes widened as he saw the harp that was playing shatter, cut completely through in a single line. To make sure, Harry shouted, "Diffindo!" again. This time a bloody line appeared above the dog's central head. The dog awakened suddenly, and it was angry. Quirrell tried to roll toward the door, but there wasn't time. Harry closed the door quickly. The last thing he saw was Voldemort's enraged face on the back of Quirrell's head. He closed his eyes and shuddered as he heard the screaming from inside the room. It didn't last long. Harry very quietly looked around. None of the portraits were in their frame, and he didn't think any of them had been. He quickly slipped his cloak on over his head, and he very quietly slipped away, headed back to the dungeons. There was an investigation, of course, when Fluffy coughed up a human skull and Quirrell went missing. Harry had made sure to slip invisibly up to his room before coming down to greet the other Slytherins, who had already started to party. The impression all of them had was that he had been in his own room the entire time. The auras questioned everyone, and no one recollected anyone being away from their rooms at the time of the death. The investigation lasted 3 days, and the case was declared an accident, although Dumbledore was reprimanded for keeping a dangerous animal on school property. On the 4th day, Harry was summoned to see the headmaster. "Good afternoon, Harry," the headmaster said. Harry stared at the floor, wondering just how much the man knew about what had happened. He'd had nightmares afterwards and felt more guilt than he'd expected, but not nearly as much guilt as he should have felt. He'd killed a man and ended a life. He suspected that it was going to haunt him more as he got older. Part of him still didn't believe that it was over. His nightmare would be to suddenly die and have to go through it all over again. He suspected that once that feeling of unreality left, that it was going to bother him more. In a way, he hoped it bothered him more. If he was the kind of person who could kill someone without feeling guilty, did that make him any better than Voldemort? The Hat had told him that his mind wasn't much different than Voldemort's. "Good afternoon," Harry said quietly. "I'm not sure why I'm here." "It occurs to me that we haven't had much time to talk," Dumbledore said congenially. "I've been busy coordinating the efforts against some of the people who have been trying to hurt you and your family." Harry nodded. "You can understand why I don't feel particularly safe, even here. We've done everything within our power to keep you safe." Harry snorted. He'd been killed 3 times in this school and almost killed twice. That didn't even count the fact that he'd been killed on the way to the school. Safest place in the wizarding world? What a joke. You can't let what happened to Professor Quirrell colour your opinion of the school, Dumbledore said. Harry shrugged. If some people hadn't insisted on having dangerous monsters in the school, there wouldn't be Professor's skulls lying around. Aren't you curious about why he was there, Harry? The headmaster asked. Not particularly, Harry said. I'm sure his reasons were his own. The headmaster looked a little sad. Lemon drop? Harry shook his head. He'd heard of Veritaserum, and he didn't trust the old man not to slip some to him inside of candy. There were some oddities in the report, Dumbledore said. There was a harp in the room that was broken with a cutting spell, and the dog had a cut on its head. Oh? Harry asked. His wand was snapped as well. It probably happened during the battle, Harry said. He cast a cutting spell at the dog, and it hit the harp instead. That is the puzzling thing. There is a spell priori incantato that reveals what spells a wand had cast in the recent past. What is not commonly known is that it can be made to work even if a wand has snapped. Oh, Harry asked, struggling to keep his face impassive. He didn't look at the headmaster. Not a single diffindo had been cast from that wand. Harry was silent for a moment and then said, "That is puzzling." The Aurors wanted to test the wands of everyone in the school, but I managed to convince them that it was just an unfortunate accident. Harry looked directly at the headmaster. Why would you do that? I understand that the severing charm has become a rather signature spell for you, the headmaster said quietly. I'd hate for the authorities to get the wrong idea. For a moment, Harry wondered if he was being threatened, and then he wondered if the older man was trying to get his gratitude. I cast that spell often enough that it wouldn't mean anything, Harry said. I'm fairly sure that I used it just this morning to cut off a slice of roast beef. He did that sometimes. It helped to remind the Slytherins around him what he was capable of. Harry believed firmly that it was better to intimidate someone now than to have to fight someone later. Still, a curious coincidence, the headmaster said. Harry suspected that the old man knew exactly what he had done, and he had the sense that the man was disappointed in him somehow. Hypothetically, Harry said, I've heard rumours of Voldemort existing as a spirit and possessing someone's body. If that person died, would it be over? The headmaster was silent for a long moment, staring at him. Finally, he shook his head. You can't assume that every rumour is true, but if that were the case, Voldemort's plans would simply be delayed and not ended while he sought out another host. Harry couldn't stop the scowl that came to his face. There's one more thing, Harry said. I understand that my parents left me money. Have you heard anything about that? That served to distract the conversation away from the topic of Quirrell, and Harry made sure that it never came up again. Slytherin won the cup, which was not a surprise. Harry had a sense that the headmaster wanted to make some sort of adjustment to the score. He kept glancing at Harry. However, there were no surprises, and that night his house celebrated. Harry celebrated as well. He'd managed to survive his first year of Hogwarts, and he was going home to feel safe again for the first time in months. For a short period at least, life was good.